Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Caithness Amateur Drum Antic Society tasting. Uh, Tonight, I'm going to do one of the first of what will be a series of tastings interspersed with other tastings I do, where I'm going to take I'm going to compare Diageo's Distillers Edition of whiskey to the core range bottling that whiskey uh, has taken and finished matured in a finishing cask. Uh, and tonight I'm looking at the Diageo's classic malts when we discuss these whiskies. We've got the Diageo Classic Malts range was introduced in 1988, and there are a small selection of whiskies that showcase the range of flavours available in single malt Scotch whisky. And they're taken from Diageo's impressively large portfolio, and they cover the smoky, sweet, rich, and light with stops in between. And they've slowly been adding to the selection and now have bottles available from many of its distilleries, including Glenkinchie, Cragganmore, Dalwhinnie, Oban, Talisker, Lagavulin, Colida, Royal Lachnagar, Glenelgin, and Dufftown. And they have then also got Distillers Editions from Glenkinchie, Cragganmore, Dalwhinnie, Oban, Talisker, Lagavulin, and Coolila when they finish the classic malt in a different cask for a period. And I'm going to do a series of these tastings comparing the classic malt to the Distillers Edition to see whether it's worth spending that much more for a tarted up whiskey. First of all, I'm going to do tonight two distilleries from the Highlands, Dalwhinnie and Oban. The Dalwhinnie tastings are the Dalwhinnie 15-year-old. We'll call this the naked version. And then I've got a sample here of the Dalwhinnie Distillers Edition 2021 15-year-old double matured, both at 43%. So Dalwhinnie sits at the heart of the majestic Cairngorms National Park in the Scottish Highlands. And it's one of the highest whisky producing distilleries in Scotland, not the highest. The Victorians described Dalwhinnie as being madly located. Even through modern eyes, it's possible to see where they're coming from. It's the third highest located distillery in Scotland, and the meteorological station that has the distinction of observing the lowest recorded temperature in Britain. And that's important in the maturing of whiskey because during the winter it gets very cold and the whiskey contracts, the wood contracts, the whiskey comes out. And then in the summer it gets hot and the wood expands. So we get this continual toing and froing of the cask and the whiskey intermingling into the wood. So the distillery maintains the ability to be completely self-contained in the event of high snows, with an entire hostel located on site to house the staff. And its isolated location is a key part of its history. Dalwhinnie means meeting place in Gaelic, a nod to the distillery's excellent central location. The Strathspey Distillery Company founded this distillery in 1897 and originally operated under the name Strathspey. Less than a year after that, however, the company went into liquidation and the name of the distillery was changed appropriately as it switched hands to the Dalwhinnie Distillery Company. Production continued with the architect Charles Doig, who is responsible for the famous pagoda-shaped roof. If you go down or up the A9, you'll pass Dalwhinnie. It looks like a ranch building, quite in a beautiful expanse with mountains. And then you've got the little village of Dalwhinnie. The train stops at Dalwhinnie too, just off to the right if you're going south and to the left if you're coming north. And Charles Doig contributed to the expansion of the distillery, and it changed hands twice more during the first half of the 20th century and was briefly owned by an American company, Cook and Bernheimer, making the very first foreign-owned Scotch distillery. In 1934, a fire destroyed most of the distillery and production had to be halted for 4 years whilst the site was being rebuilt. After the rebuild was completed in 1938, the distillery had to remain closed until 1940 due to wartime restrictions on barley. But since 1940, the distillery has produced whisky almost uninterrupted, save for a brief period in 1986 when the distillery underwent a complete refurbishment. Today, Dalwhinnie is owned by Diegeo and is part of its classic malts range. The brand reached great critical acclaim, with the 15-year-old and the Distillers Edition being awarded the Mondy Selection Gold medals. So when you're one of the highest distilleries in Scotland, you can be sure that the water you're going to be working with will be special. The Alt and Sluch burn, which provides the water used in Dalwhinnie's production, is wonderfully clear and fresh, thanks in part to a large proportion of it comes from snow melt. And as the spring is a tributary of the River Spey, there has been a great deal of discussion over the years about whether Dalwhinnie should be classified as a Speyside whisky or not. Dalwhinnie's location in the Western Highlands lies almost at the geographical heart of Scotland, resulting in conflicting opinions on which region it should technically belong to. It's a relatively small distillery with a capacity of 1.3 million litres of pure alcohol a year. And it's one of the few sites in Scotland still using wooden worm tubs. Most sites today use metal ones, if they use them at all. Dalwhinnie operates with only a single wash still at 17,000 litres and a single spirit still at 14,000 litres. Both stills are made by Abercrombie & Co. and have a traditional still shape with a large bulbous base and gradually narrowing neck. And the neck of the pot still is very tall. This allows the whisky to separate very well, and it creates a very fine distilled spirit. It used its own floor maltings until they were shut down in 1968. And now Dalwhinnie sources its malt from one of Diegeo's industrial malting sites. The malt is very lightly peated, but only enough to give it a hint of a smoky flavour. It also has a hint of heather in its flavour, which the distillers say is due to the heather that surrounds the site. There's 2 rack warehouses on site, which have room for over 5,000 casks of aging whisky. Dalwhinnie predominantly uses bourbon casks. Some of the Distillers Edition, however, are aged in Oloroso sherry casks. The distillery does a range of official bottlings, with a signature single malt being 15-year-old, although it also produces a 20-year-old and a 36-year-old, among other Distillers Editions. Almost all bottlings are official ones. Independent bottlings haven't been seen for decades. Only a minor percentage of the single malt distilled at Dalwhinnie is marketed as single malt, with the majority being used in the Diageo, Buchanan and black and white blends. Due to its high altitude setting, the distillery today also fulfills a dual function as a working meteorological station, with readings being taken daily. The writer Ian Banks, in his book In Raw Spirit, about his trip through Scotland and whisky, said that if you don't like Dalwhinnie, whisky is not for you. The new make has aromas of pea soup and sauerkraut, and masses of sulphur. It's heavy and with some peat smoke and exhaust fumes. The palate is dry and deep with sweetness underneath, and it's heavy. The finish is sulphury. So we're going to start off with the Dalwhinnie 15-year-old. I've got a 20 cl bottle I bought in the whisky shop in Fort William, and I've watched a few videos of this, and they do warn you about the rather flimsy nature of the packaging. I think the issue is this bottom. It's not very solid. And one thing I've noticed on opening this one is that the cork is quite stiff, but it's quite narrow and has a chance of breaking, I suspect. But let's see what we have here. Dalwhinnie 15, yeah, that cork is not going back in without a little bit of coaxing. I wonder how long that will last. Better get some friends around and finish this one. So, I think this one's aged in a combination of bourbon and Oloroso sherry cask. But I think there's very light amount of Oloroso sherry in cask in here. And there's just a smidge of smoke running through to add some depth. These are all going to be chill filtered, and they're all going to have colour added, although for a 15-year-old it is quite pale in colour. .43%, and it's got a very thin tide line. There are a few tears, sticky tears, but not heavily so. And straight away in the nose it's very mellow, with a rich sweetness. And there's lots of American oak and creme brulee character. And you do get a very, very faint whisper of smoke. But there's that classic honeyed element with lemon zest. It's got a good weight, and it's quite aromatic with toffee, fruit salad, lush nectarine and custard. A bit floral, apple blossom, honeysuckle. And then you get apple peels, pear, and again just that in the background, a very soft touch of smoke. And it's sugary, sweet white grapes in a very light wildflower honey. And ripe apples and juicy white fleshed peaches. And there's a few ripe gooseberries in here and Mirabelle plums. Very flowery and floral. And as you go on, it gets even more sweet. Candied oranges and honey with almonds. Hints of marzipan and vanilla. The clean barley distillate has matured nicely and has a very delicate aroma. some heather in the background, and that negligible peaty reminder of smoke. We'll try them out. And it's an immediate and quite thick start. The smoke is light but noticeable. It's a good mix of dessert-like sweetness, Greek yogurt with acacia honey and crisp wood. Quite malty. Walnuts steeped in manuka honey with vanilla sponge. Gentle smoke weaves its way through the cereal with a touch of spice. Mild honey, ripe Mirabelle plums and gooseberries, which bring a nice slight fruitiness into play. Ripe apples with a mealy crystalline structure, juicy pears, orange marmalade without the pieces of peel, and that fragile barley that comes to rest through the ripening period is now a little more malty. Blanched almonds, and the mild, bitter, free, and somewhat used looking finally as a light note of milk chocolate and vanilla. The minimal peatiness floats together with the floral undertones and a hint of heather in the background. And the finish is long, malty, with walnuts, almonds. It's quite soft. Try 8 drops of water in this. And with water, it becomes more pollen-like. It's got a sweet and woody whiskey. You could smell the oak now. The vanilla and the honey are still there. Fresh pears, roasted apples, and there's a bit more spice, a hint of white pepper. Still delicately fresh and floral. And there's a soft, floral, sulphury profile with water. Juicy, almost overripe green apples. A hint of banana. We'll try them out. And it's sweet, woody, and slightly sour. You can taste vanilla, apples, and lemons. Very soft with a honeyed sweetness throughout. A curious green, sour grain note in the development. Barley sugars, apple, and the faintest hint of orange. Soft spices and a hint of nuttiness. And with water, it's a medium long finish. You can feel the sourness of apples and citrus fruit, finished with dark chocolate. So the Dalwhinnie 15-year-old It's now fully awake. It's shaken off its sulphury overcoat to reveal itself in its honeyed guise. It's a good malt with a beautiful profile which is worth your time. I think the presentation, chill filtered, coloured, 43%, weakens what is an already gentle dram. I'm happy to have a Dalwhinnie. But I think compared to what it was 15 years ago, it's really getting sweeter. Unless that's me getting bitterer. Right, I'm going to cleanse my palate with some Hawkshead whiskey smoked, glazed whiskey smoked cashews. Just a couple. Yeah, very nice. So next we have the Dalwhinnie, the Distillers Edition, and this is from 2021. 15-year-old double matured. So this one was distilled in 2006 and bottled in 2021. So it's been finished in rich Oloroso seasoned American oak. The 15-year-old, which we just tried, is known for its rich honey flavour. And the Distillers Edition that we have here gets the added finish of a Oloroso sherry cask. And Oloroso is aged at a higher proof to keep flora from forming, or the layer of yeast that can form during fermentation and aging. So Oloroso has a high glycerol content that allows it to be perceived as sweeter, even though it's naturally dry. And this dry style of dessert wine helps to balance what is normally a very sweet Scotch and add nuttiness to it. So this is similar in colour. This is the first one with a little bit of water added. And this is the Distillers Edition. This is possibly just a little darker actually, with the heavier Oloroso finish. And it definitely has a thicker tide line and stickier tears. Again, chill filtered, coloured, and 43% ABV. And it is different. I've got the other one here. On this one, I'm getting toasted and buttered hot cross buns and milk chocolate with hints of dried fruits and nuts, iced tea, sweet and fruity and sour. The original 15 is definitely sweeter and more honey, although I do get peaches and fruits on the Distillers Edition. But you also get a bit of bitter notes, something like tea, peach, apricot, vanilla, peach melba, a whiff of cinnamon, and it's a little citrusy. And there's a hint of tobacco on the Distillers Edition. Apples, pears, banana. The smoke is gone on this one. So I think on this one, the Distillers Edition, it's got more structure, more profoundness, and less of that easy sweetness. Notes of stout, chocolate, cigars, walnut cake. It's all very nice indeed. We'll try the palate. There's plenty of rich dried fruit, caramel, banana definitely, and pineapple. And there's the spices again, coming from the Oloroso, nutmeg and cinnamon. And a subtle waxiness coats the tongue. And on the palate, I'm getting more honey. It's like drinking honey water. It's light, delicate, while being full of flavour. It's certainly on the sweet side, with notes of honey and starfruit. And there's a brief note of cherry on the mid palate. The front and mid palate are quite clean, while the finish, the end palate, there's a bit of that sulphur taste, honey, nutty, and bright tropical fruits. This one crushes the regular 15. There's more toffee, coffee, walnut wine again, Ovaltine, and proper chocolate. I mean chocolate by a chocolatier, and not chocolate from a huge factory. And there's drops of stout again. I'm going to try 8 drops of water in this. This is a Spey tasting glass, a lost distillery, I suppose. And of course, Spey was in Kingussie, just up the road from Dalwhinnie. And now with water, it's sweet, malty, and there's clear sherry perceptible. But it's not in your face. Honey comes through, some menthol, herbs, candy, heather, a touch of pepper. Not yet fully ripe, slightly sour pineapple. Seems much creamier and smoother in direct comparison to the 15. Try them out. The sweetness is subdued. All the other flavours other than the honey are present for longer. Just a bit of malt that wasn't there straight out of the bottle as well. It goes in the direction of honey sweetness though. And then sour oak. Very pronounced Earl Grey tea. And this slightly sour pineapple. It harmonises very well. The herbal note remains, but much less pronounced on the tongue than on the nose. And on the finish, the herbal note becomes a little stronger again. Light fruit pears, uh, pear, clearly pear, yellow, ripe, juicy, malty, subtly sweet, and it does stay there for a while. Well, I think Dalwhinnie's always been a great introduction to Scotch and something that can surprise people who have a set idea on what Scotch should taste like. And the Distillery Edition allows for something a bit more complex while sticking to that sweeter profile. And it could be enjoyed by those who may not really partake in Scotch. It's richly satisfying. Takes on the aromatic and tropical notes from the Oloroso sherry. I do think this one is maybe a bit too straightforward and sweet for my taste, but it would be a fantastic choice for anyone looking for a sweeter, easy drinking style whisky. And I think you could use Dalwhinnie to introduce many people to the category, even those that were convinced they did not like Scotch of any kind. Of the two, the Distillers Edition is slightly juicier and more interesting, feels more balanced. It's really very good with a slight coffee-ish side. And I think the Distillers Edition harks back to what the 15-year-old was like maybe 15 years ago. So I'm going to cleanse my palate and we'll move on to Oban now. So more of these whiskey smoked cashews. So the two whiskies we're going to look at for the comparing Diageo's Distillers Edition to the core range bottling for the Oban are the Oban 14-year-old at 43% and the Distillers Edition 2021 14-year-old double matured at 43%. I think the Distillers Edition is slightly darker, and we'll find out why that is, because they've both been coloured when we look at the maturation. But Oban Distillery is one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland, having been established in 1794. And the distillery came first, and the town built up around it. And it's especially unusual for being one of the last surviving urban distilleries. It was founded by two brothers, John and Hugh Stevenson, who were from Oban itself. And the distillery was founded on the site of an old brewery. And it's been incredibly influential on the town of Oban itself. It was a major source of industry. Production at the site began in 1794, and the two brothers ran the operations together until Hugh Stevenson died in 1820. And upon learning of his father's death, Hugh's son Thomas returned from Buenos Aires to manage production at Oban Distillery. Thomas acquired the remaining stocks in the distillery in 1822, thereby gaining total control of the site. But despite Thomas Stevenson's strong start to running the distillery, by 1829, a series of unsuccessful investments left Thomas bankrupt and highly in debt. Keeping things in the Stevenson family, Thomas's eldest son, John, took over operations at the distillery. John bought Oban Distillery from his father's creditors for the price of £1,500 in 1831. Then, after operating successfully under his management for over 30 years, the distillery was sold on to Peter Cumsey in 1866, who then sold Oban Distillery to James Walter Higgins, who refurbished and modernised it. In 1898, the distillery was taken over by the Oban and Altmore Glenlivet Company. Alexander Edwards took the helm of the operation, and a consortium made up of John Dewar and Sons, James Buchanan and Company, and White Horse Distillers also became involved in the running of the distillery. But around this time, the distillery suffered enormous losses due to the Pattison crisis. Pattison blends were one of the major buyers of Oban single malt. After suffering for a few years, the distillery managed to regain some traction, and in 1923 the Oban Distillery Company, which was owned by Buchanan Dewar, bought the site. In 1925, Distillers Company Limited, who took over Oban Distillery, bought out Buchanan Dewar's. In 1930, the administration of the site was transferred to Scottish Malt Distillers, SMD. The distillery was mothballed from 1931 to 1937 due to the harsh economic climate. Following production relaunching at the site, the distillery prospered. In 1968, the distillery stopped using its own floor maltings, and the entire site underwent a major reconstruction. And following this large-scale reconstruction, the distillery reopened in 1972, and it's continued to thrive as it has progressed into the 21st century. Diegeo, who acquired the site through the UDV merger in 1989, now operates the distillery. Under Diegeo, the distillery has continued to release new expressions from its warehouse, a trend that will hopefully continue for years to come. With a production capacity of 670,000 litres, Oban is Diegeo's second smallest distillery after Royal Lochnagar in terms of production. It uses water from Loch Glen Aberach for its production, and it's one of the few distilleries in Scotland that still uses the traditional worm tubs located outside the stillhouse. To get the desired mild and fruity flavour, the temperature of the water in which both the snake of the wash and the spirit still are located must be set precisely. This may be just high enough that it still condenses, and there's also quite a lot of copper contact. There's only one wash still and one spirit still at Oban Distillery. The wash still has a capacity of 12,600 litres and is filled with 10,500 litres, while the spirit still is slightly smaller at 7,200 litres and is filled with 6,000 litres. For a milder, fruitier flavour, Oban uses relatively tall stills with a constriction, giving you more copper contact. To avoid overboiling and for better separation of the alcohol, distilling tends to be slower. A special heating system with a kind of steam-powered pan ensures an even distillation process. The malt comes from Diegeo's central maltings. Up until 1968, Oban used its own maltings. The distillery's mash tun is where tradition meets modernity. The rake inside is as it was in earlier times, but the lid is new, as is the stainless steel from which the mash tun is made. It's filled with 6.75 tons of barley malt, which is only slightly smoky at 1 part per million. The malt is mixed with 60,000 litres of water and goes through 3 processes. Only 32,000 litres of mash, the beginning with the most sugar content, are processed at each time. The rest is reused to increase efficiency. The 32,000 litres of mash are distributed to 4 wooden washbacks, and the fermentation period at Oban is very long and lasts between 84 and 135 hours. This is the only way to get the fruity aromas into the whisky later. They have a small dunnage warehouse inside, which is used to store the casks. The distillery uses a combination of white oak and sherry casks for the maturation of its whisky, as well as a few special casks for the Distillers Edition, including Montilla Fino sherry casks, as we're about to find out. Oban forms a frontier between the Highlands and the Islands. I went to Mull in August and we got the ferry from Oban to Craigmuir and Mull. Visited Tobermory Distillery. Didn't have time to go to Oban. But it forms that frontier both geographically and in terms of the character of the single malt. It's released several official bottlings, which currently include 10-year-old, 14-year-old, and Little Bay, as well as the Distillers Edition. Previous Oban bottlings included a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, Manager's Dram, a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, 32-year-old. The 14-year-old was introduced as part of the Diegeo Classic Malt series. Independent bottlings of Oban, on the other hand, are extremely hard to find. Only 3 are known: a 30-year-old from Cadenhead, released in 1993, a bottling from Gordon MacPhail in 1972, and an 18-year-old from Signatory Vintage. The new make has a fruity nose, a touch of smoke to start, big peach, and high citrus orange notes. It smells perfumed and complex with depth. The palate is creamy and gentle, and then orange peel arrives and spreads around the tongue, and the finish is smoky. So we're going to start off with the 14-year-old, Oban 14-year-old, 43%, chill filtered, coloured, and matured in ex-bourbon refill American oak hogsheads. And let's see what we have here. Well, you can tell that's coloured for a 14-year-old. It's suspiciously coppery. Well, a 14-year-old in ex-bourbon. And again, it's got a very thin tidal line. But I do like it. It's rather delicate, but shows nicely fresh, fruity aromas, apples, mirabelles, oranges. Held back a little by some mineral notes and leather. There's a lightest hint of smoke. Seaweed. Hey, and something of lipstick as well. A fragrant waxiness I often get in Ben Nevis. It's quite inviting, fruity and uplifting. Subtle aromas of vanilla, fudge, honey and dried fruit. Mentioned candied orange and lemon peel. And it's all supported by milk chocolate and malted barley. a wisp of gentle, earthy peat smoke, and hints of salted caramel. There's hazelnut praline and stewed apple, and yeah, we'll try them out. It's a bit spicier. It's a bit more intense than you would expect from the nose, and the modest ABV. Pepper, a little salt, coastal of course, nutmeg, and hints of tangy mustard. There's some fruity notes and honey, some grist, heather, and saline seaweed again. Soft, sweet, and creamy. Lovely notes of crumbly fudge and brown sugar come through initially. The peat smoke's a little more pronounced on the mouth than it is on the nose, but it's got a very low, unobtrusive level. And it has the effect of binding the other characteristics together like a conductor of an orchestra. It wisps around everything. And it's got a soft, earthy, and almost mossy edge. Salted caramel, vanilla essence, and plump, juicy sultanas. Baked apple, pinches of cinnamon, and cocoa powder on top. Fresh lemon zest. And a distinct malty, biscuit-like note. Something floral sits in the background. It's reminiscent of citrus blossom. And there's a final, almost mineralic, almost flinty note to remind us of the ever-present peat smoke. And the finish is long, fairly dry, peppery oak with a light herbal note. The sweet and fruity characteristics slowly fade, and that leaves the smoky aspect and hints of wood and baking spices to play in. And it results the whisky becoming drier with time, which is accentuated by that late peppery warmth. I'm going to add 8 drops of water to this. It's still quite complex and interesting. A blend of sweet toffee and caramel. And still that slight smokiness. Tropical fruits like caramelized pineapple, banana, lychee, and orange. And there's slight nuances of lemon zest and nutmeg. And light, heathery, fruity, zesty sets of smells amongst the initial alcoholic burn. Once that settles though, the zesty and citry sets of flavours joined by a real heather honey sweetness. It's a good bodied malt, just that little bit of smoke there in the background. Try them out. At first it feels like a mouthful of low sugar pudding, but there's also canned fruits like orange, pineapple, lychee, along with the syrup that will be usually in the can with them. Red fruits as well. Although the whisky isn't aged in ex-sherry cask, those juicy fruits just keep coming in. Orchard fruits, tropical fruits. There's a good malty backbone to it too, and a pinch of salt before the oak spice picks up at the end of the sip. Lastly, there's some almonds and sea salt. And the finish is green apples, lemon zest, and croissant. A good lingering finish. And that orange zest flavour slowly fades out, only for the underlying smoke to endure and last a little longer. This Oban 14-year-old shows an above average complexity and some advanced aromas, but it's easily drinkable at the same time. It's a very good whisky and delightfully easy drinking. It's easy to see why this continues to be so popular and offers a light yet characterful set of aromas and flavours. And do you know what? It's very, very, very faint, but it would be the perfect introduction to the world of peated Scotch whiskies for a beginner, especially given the low levels of smoke compared to other malts from somewhere like Islay. The sweetness and relative lightness mean it would be very good as an aperitif. I think it's maybe not quite what it was in the past. I think in the past it probably had a bit more oomph. And it would be interesting to know how many casks on average go into a batch of Oban 14-year-old. Right, I'm going to try some more of these whiskey salt cashews. So next up, we have the Oban Distillers Edition 2021 14-year-old double matured at 43%. So this one was distilled in 2007, bottled in 2021. And to underline its sea-laced flavours, the master distiller of Oban has chosen Montilla Fino, this dry, delicate cask, to enhance the distinctly graceful style of Oban. It was firstly matured in refill American and European oak casks, with the second maturation finishing in Montilla Fino seasoned recharged American oak and heavily recharged new American oak ends. I never realised that in Montilla Morillas they do make Fino out of PX grapes. And I do like Oban, and I've tried the Oban Distillers Edition in the past. I do think that maturing in a Fino sherry cask usually results in a very dry whisky. However, floral and other fine fruit notes are often added. There's not many Fino finishes on the market, as this sherry is considered too dry by most whisky connoisseurs. It can be mitigated, for example, by double maturing and using other sherry casks in addition to the Fino. So this one has got a sort of clear amber colour. It has fine beading and long, thin legs. And the first thing I get on the nose is honey, raisin, and cinnamon. If you give it a bit of time, you get green apples and a little bit of acetone. fine, clean, and sweet, with hints of salty sea breeze and a light grapey note from the dry phenol. And that grows more pungent with time, the hint of smoke and spice. There's a light sea spray with some gooseberry and white peach, along with toasty oak spice, tobacco, mustard, walnuts, chalk, putty, roasted sesame. And you know those old magazines that have been sitting in the magazine rack for months? Glossy magazines. A bit of petrol and marmalade. Try them out. And the nose carries over to the front of the palate. Those same notes of honey, raisin and cinnamon. The middle gets a little meatier with slight salinity. And this is the kind of Scotch you want to chew on. It's creamy, smooth, sweet, gentle grapiness. And then you get the malty flavours developing. All held together by that backbone of sea salt and gentle white pepper spiciness. It's very easy to drink. Subtle sweetness with a creamy grain. More fruit. Drizzles of salted caramel and some peppery spice. This is clearly West Coast, although that could be the West Coast of Spain. And the finish is long, attractively sweet, smoky, and clean, with an appetizing oak spice, drying with an attractive light peppery aftertaste. Peppery spice builds with green oak. It's light and long, a good amount of heat and black pepper. Ashes, a little cardboard, mustard sauce in the end. Try 8 drops of water in this. And with water, it's still fruity, spicy and clean. It does ramp up the salinity a bit, as I often find with water on coastal whiskies. Try them out. And it shifts the front palate to more of a floral quality. The honey is more of a honeysuckle. The transition from the front of the palate to the finish seems shorter, but something a touch medicinal there. And with water, the finish is shorter, but it has something a touch medicinal here, and that's the phenol cascade. It's just as light, but sweeter notes of honeyed pastry complement the black pepper. I think portions in this batch have spent 14 years in bourbon casks and sherry casks, and then get a finish in Fino cask after the marriage. And for me, Fino is the most exciting sherry, not always the prettiest, but it's the most versatile type of sherry next to Manzanilla. It's a nicely balanced whiskey and would also be very suitable for beginners. I like the salty and smoky combination. I think this whiskey would be huge at much higher ABV, 50% and above. Oban has a bit of everything. It's like a little salty, a little malty, honey sweetness, orange zest, and that underlying smoke that doesn't really overplay its part. All too often, if a whiskey describes itself as having a smoky flavour, then that tends to be the dominant note. But that's not the case with this Oban, or the one before it. It's a close call between the standard 14 and the Distillers Edition, which is essentially the usual 14-year-old, but with an extra few months maturation in a sherry cask. And for the price hike, it doesn't sway me from their long-standing signature. If you want a good, balanced and reliable malt, or simply a classic malt on your shelf, Oban 14-year-old is worth a try. Thanks for listening.